me how I pronounce your name, sir.
It's Timon.
Diamond.
It's like Simon. Your English name Simon with a T in there.
With a T.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Timon.
Very good. Love it.
So nice to meet you. Good to meet you. I'm
Good
glad
to meet you too.
you could make
Thank you
it.
so much.
Well,
Yeah.
before we start, do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, a couple questions. So, do you live there in the Netherlands?
I do. Yes, all my
Okay.
life.
Okay, all your life. So
Yes.
you're native.
Yeah.
That's great.
Not really native. I was born in Indonesia and I was adopted by Dutch parents.
Okay, very good.
Yes.
Very. And then how long is this interview? So having a sense for timing.
Well, it's up to you. I mean, in the description, I said we could do the interview well within an hour, but I don't know how long you'll have.
Okay. Hey, let's just watch it. I have up to an hour, 45 minutes.
Yeah.
So
All right.
okay, that's good because sometimes I'm on TV and you have 90 seconds.
That's great.
then I talk differently. I talk in sound bites. You know?
Yeah, well, you don't have to talk in sound bites now. So my first question for you is, when you think of the Netherlands, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
The soccer team and the orange uniforms and how good you were. I was cheering for you in the couple years ago. Well, when was it when you guys were right up there in the finals? Or I forget how long ago it was, but I remember pulling for the Netherlands. I've been there several times. It's beautiful. I speak a little Afrikaans, which is a form of Dutch.
Yeah,
right?
it is.
Afrikaans, kan je verstaan? Kan je me verstaan?
Ja, ik versta je al een beetje.
I speak a little Afrikaans, which is Reformed Dutch.
How come? Why?
Beautiful country. Why?
Yeah, how come you speak?
I lived in South Africa for 2 years.
There you go. Yeah. So, what about Dutch education? Do you have any clue about our principles in Holland?
I know a little, just because we have a pretty good presence there with our leader and me.
Yeah.
Working with CPS. I've been there several times. I've visited, so I know a little bit about your education system. I admire it. I think I spoke at one of your conferences a while back, and so yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, I have a couple of main topics I'd like to talk about.
Sure.
The current state of education in the United States, in America. Today's education in the United States, future education, the role of the 7 habits in education as a solution for future education, maybe what education could be. I'd like to talk about your latest projects. I'd like to honor your father. And, well, let's see. I noticed doing the research that it was really hard to find a video where you explain the 7 habits, like almost like a tutorial, where people could go, students who want to learn from the master himself. So
Sure.
I know you've explained the habits a gazillion times, but just for the sake of clarity and just as a reference point for those students in Holland, those parents in Holland who would like to know, I am going to ask you to elicit about the 7 habits.
Be happy to.
All right.
Simon.
So let's start with American education today. If you have to reflect on education, what do you think of the current state of education in America?
I'd give it a C.
All right.
Another grade. Well, on one hand, you've got the majority of teachers and administrators are really good people, and they are really, they care a lot. They love their kids. You see it in their faces. So I don't have a problem generally with the quality of our teachers and the quality of our administrators. Overall, I'm impressed. Are they all good? No, but I think the majority are really good and well-intended and well-educated. And then, but I think there's a lot of broken pieces in the system, and I think it shows up in. I think, for example, there's way too much focus on the almighty test score.
Mm-hmm.
I am not a fan of standardized tests as well. And I feel like it's causing a lot of harm because I think increasingly the whole child is vital. If you look at the nature of work time and with the industrial age and what it required, and now the knowledge worker age or information age, call it what you will, what it requires is totally different. The career skills gap is massive. By that I mean what employers want and what schools are giving employers in terms of their graduates. This career skills gap is huge, and it's primarily around social emotional skills, leadership skills, 21st century life skills, and there's different names for this. Soft skills, right? So recent poll I looked at, 85% of academic officers in universities said to the question, are the graduates you're giving employers prepared to work? They said 85%. Ask employers the same question, 11%. And the big gap is these career skills, and these are things like responsibility, initiative, goal setting and planning, prioritization, time management, collaboration, cooperation, flexibility, listening skills, communication skills, flexibility, renewal, et cetera. These are kind of the key skills that are needed more and more. So I feel like in the American education system, there is just way too much focus on that one almighty test score. There's been legislation in the past couple of years. Every Child Succeeds Act replaced No Child Left Behind. And No Child Left Behind was very much focused on the academic score. Good intent, responsible schools, but it kind of backfired in training people to take tests. And Every Child Succeeds, I think, is a good positive direction because it's all about it's giving states more flexibility, and it's adding social emotional learning to education and making it a requirement to some degree at least. So I think that's a really positive thing. So I think there's broken system in terms of focusing on the academic side of the child, not the whole child. And I think the constantly changing demands coming from districts and states on schools is perplexing, demotivating, and just sucks the life out of teachers.
Punitive accountability, for example. I think it also depends on who you talk to. I mean, I've done an interview series with Diane Ravitch, Pasi Sahlberg, and some people say, Edie Hurst Jr. is a person as well I talk to, and some people say, well, we have this so-called global education reform movement, and those are people who want to reform education without solid evidence. And some people like Edie Hurst Jr. is stating, if we focus on skills, that will lead to inequality, because the things that matter most, well, it's his opinion, is solid knowledge, and without knowledge there are no skills. And he's afraid that sometimes parts of the curriculum in reading, math, and stuff like that are disappearing because we are focusing more on skills. So what do you think of that argument, that we need thorough basic knowledge in order to have skills at all?
Yeah. I believe that, the basics of reading, writing, math, basics of curriculum are necessary and insufficient. And so I'm not against getting rid of them or doing less with them. I just feel like you've got a whole other side. You've got to educate. And I think it needs to be balanced. And I think we ought to develop other measures of performance besides just, how's the score. So this is kind of what, we have started with our efforts with Leader and Me, is we have found a solution that is really innovative, developed by teachers and administrators, that works well in improving academics at the same time teaching these whole life skills. So I don't think it's an either or.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the wrong paradigm to think about, you know what, if I spend less time on academics and more time teaching some of these life skills, it's going to, you know, one weakens to the expense of the other. I don't think that's the case. I think you can do both and do them better with a different paradigm. By paradigm, I mean, it's the mindset you approach it with. And again, I wouldn't be saying all of this if I hadn't seen it.
Yes.
But I don't come. My father's an educator, you know, and I've been in the education system. But I'm not a teacher, administrator. I don't come from that background. I'm coming from the background of seeing something that's worked really well and trying to bring that to as many kids as possible around the world. So I've seen it happen where, yeah, I'm seeing schools that go in and say, we're going to teach our kids these life skills, and watch what happens to academics. By teaching them goal setting and helping them become responsible for their own grades. You know, the best way to improve reading scores might not be just better reading instruction or curriculum.
Exactly.
But rather teaching the kid how to set a goal
yeah.
around how to get better at reading, right? The self-motivating, and they own.
Yeah. Well, that's a great answer, because, you know, I'm trying to be neutral here, but I might be biased because I've been talking to people like Diane Ravitch and Pasi Sahlberg, who have a certain view on things, and that's why I like to hear the other stories as well. That's why we are talking. And I agree that if you want to improve reading and mathematics, it's not only a matter of spending more time reading. Sometimes it's better to develop other parts like music, like sports. And somehow administrators don't seem to realize that the brain develops by doing music as well. That if you make music, you might become a better reader. So do you see?
I totally agree with that, Time. And I think I always use the metaphor of a car has 4 tires, and if one is low on air, right, the other 3 wear unevenly as well. It hurts all of them.
Yeah.
I think a child is a whole person, and they've got a body, physical, the mind, the mental, the heart, social, emotional, and the spirit, which is kind of your motivation, drive, right, inspiration. And if all 4 aren't nurtured well, they all wear unevenly, right? And so if the kid is imbalanced and isn't getting what they need emotionally, that's going to majorly impact their academics, right? And vice versa. So I you know, there's nothing better than the whole education approach, in my opinion.
I agree. So the No Child Left Behind Act was replaced by Every Child Succeed Act.
Yes, every student succeeds.
Every student succeeds, ESSA. But the fear is still in the DNA, right, of teachers. How do you get rid of the fear of testing and punitive accountability? How do you move on? You have so much experience in that field.
Yeah. Well, it's really hard because it's ingrained in the system. And, you know, I was just in Texas a little while back, and the whole state education, you know, all the educators were up in arms because they just passed legislation that gives every school a letter grade at the end of the year. Florida does this too. And now, you know, Texas, the second biggest state in the union, is doing every grade, every school, a B school, a D school, A school.
Wow.
And they're kind of like, you can't do that. You know, you can't do that. I'd like to give you a letter grade, legislator, about how you're performing, you know. And so it's alive and well. The almighty test score is alive and well, in my opinion. And but they feel guilty. Everyone feels guilty. In fact, when I was in the Netherlands, spoke at a conference a couple years back, they had this great little illustration, and it had a couple of proctors at a desk, and it had all these animals. And then the proctors were saying to the animals, for your final test score, climb that tree.
Yeah, I know that picture.
You seen that before? Yeah.
Yes.
They have an elephant, a bird, a monkey, a rat, a snake.
Yeah.
And the whole conference was based on that cartoon. And I thought it was so good because it's saying, look, all these gifts and skills these kids have. And we say, here's the exam you're going to take, and it's climbing that tree. And guess what? The monkey's going to be great at it, right?
Yeah.
The bird will cheat and fly there, and we'll say they're cheating. The elephant won't be able to do a thing, and so forth. But what I sensed at the conference was there's a general guilt, and I feel this across the world, because I just got back from China, and it's this guilt of, we know these kids are a whole. They're elephants and tigers and lions and monkeys are also different, and yet we know we're trying to measure them on one thing because it's easy to do. It's the only thing we know what to do, how to do, and they feel guilty, and that's why people are searching for something more, because they enter education, they're excited, they're ambitious, and then they're seeing these talented kids channeled into one way of doing things, or they're not, they get this paradigm of, I'm not smart, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm scoring the 25th percentile. And I think it's dangerous, and so I don't think we're making a lot of progress in the almighty test score, to be honest. But there's a lot of efforts to do so, and I'm seeing there are some breakout schools and some breakout solutions. I think Leader in Me, what we're doing, has been one of them.
Yeah, but let's go back to the start of the Leader in Me program. I saw in the Scott Miller interview you did, you referred to a story about the school leader who was told they were letting her go because of low test scores or bad results. And then she visited a conference of your father and she was inspired. And she brought the principles, the 7 habits, into her school, and it changed the school into such a great way. So there is a way to overcome the fear and to overcome the punitive accountability and, well, mostly the fear. So you have seen it so many times in schools.
Yeah.
And you come into a school that has been destroyed by punitive accountability and standardized testing. Where do you start? How do you turn such a school into, how do you bring in the positive vibe?
Okay, well, could I share that, how that started and how I saw this? If you don't mind, I was invited to go to a school called A.B. Combs Elementary about 10 years ago in Raleigh, North Carolina. Public school, 350 kids, high poverty, 28 languages spoken in the school, and they were failing, just stunk. They're a magnet school, meaning the school with a theme.
Mm-hmm.
Students from the district. They weren't attracting anyone. They had capacity for 850 kids, and they had 350.
Wow.
New principal comes in. She tries to turn the school around, and nothing works. She called them random acts of improvement. And Muriel Summers is her name.
Yeah.
So the superintendent, her boss, comes and says, Muriel, we're going to shut you down. That's not working. She goes, oh, give me another year. And he goes, no, I'll give you a week to come up with a new idea. So she's desperate. And she goes, Stephen R. Covey, my father, happens to be in town speaking at a conference. She has $150 left in her professional development budget. She goes to the conference. She comes late, sits in the front row because she's late. During his speech, he's talking about these 7 habits, like being proactive, taking responsibility, not being a victim, thinking win-win. The idea of, if you want to succeed with other people, you've got to want to win yourself and want them to win, mutual benefit, and so forth. And while he's speaking, she's thinking, oh my goodness, this is exactly what our professionals in the school need and our kids. During a break, Dr. Covey and Muriel Summers, elementary school principal, can these ideas be taught to young kids? She said he kind of paused, looked up, and said, I don't know, why not? Why don't you give it a try and let me know how it goes? So she goes back to her staff, tells about this experience, tells them school's going to be shut down. Do you guys want to save it? They said yes. Well, why don't we do some quick interviews and go out and ask employers, all the ones around us, what they want their schools to produce. They go out, interview employers, and then parents. And they asked them, what do you want your school to produce? And they said, we want kids that are accountable, responsible, show up on time, get along well with other people, adapt well, are self-starters, are creative thinkers, are balanced. Basically, they listed these 21st century skills we always talk about. No one said higher test scores. So she gets all this data. Columbine, remember all the school shooting in Columbine had just happened at this time. So this was like 20 years ago. And she said, this is it, guys. This is leadership. I'm going to call this leadership. That's what I'm saying. We got to teach our kids leadership and unleash their talents. So she goes back to her superintendent. This is our new idea. He says, that's compelling. So she starts this, and she said, we're going to start by getting our staff on the same page. We're going to teach them all the 7 habits, which she did. We have a common leadership language. We develop we start our dirty laundry, got things on the table. We're going to model what we want the kids to do. Starts with us, because we're messed up. We're the problem, not the kids. So they started that. We're going to educate the whole child. We're going to believe every child has genius. Every kid is going to have a leadership role and responsibility. So they taught the kids the 7 habits. They gave them leadership roles. People were, a playground leader or a leader of morning announcements or an audiovisual leader or a leader of school tours. 350 kids had leadership roles. She gave them all leadership notebooks. They kept track of their own grades and their own scores. They owned their education. She said, no one comes to parent-teacher conferences. What's wrong? She said, we're going to change the name. Student-led conference. That's what it's called. You go invite your parent to come to your conference. You do the presentation. Tell them your goals, how you're doing. That changed everything. Great. So they did this experiment. Year later, test scores shot up. They weren't trying for test scores, right? Student self-confidence. 3 years later, 850 kids, huge waiting list.
Amazing.
Test scores went from the lowest in the district to one of the highest with high poverty. Same kids. Housing prices doubled in the area. Everybody wanted to get into the school. And they got named the #1 magnet school of their kind in the country. This was 5 years after they started. Unbelievable. I went and visited the school about 10 years after they started for the first time. Heard what happened and walked in, and you could just feel the culture. And it was a culture of belief in the children, whole child. You run the school, and you could see it in their faces. They'd come up to you and say, hi, my name is Johnny, and I'm a leader of, what are you a leader of, Mr. Covey? And I'm like, wow, where'd that come from? So I saw that, and I was blown away by it, and they reinvented themselves, and they didn't worry about test scores because they naturally just rose because the kids were thriving. And the teachers also, there were like 100 applicants for every job that opened up. The 5th graders would interview the teachers as part of their leadership responsibility. Teachers said they feared the 5th graders more than the adults. But we saw that, and we said, this is unbelievable. We just found penicillin. And this is something that needs to get to as many people as possible. So archaeological dig found out how they did it, and we said this can be done by anyone who's willing. And so it just started going across the world, and now today there are 4,000 schools.
Amazing. Doing
this approach, including 100 there in the Netherlands with CPS. We hope to get it to 10% of the schools in the world. We feel like if we could do that, it'll influence other people, in like ways to do good things also, and we could impact education in a major way. So that's been my experience, Timon, is seeing that and feeling like it can happen. And the schools there in the Netherlands are doing this as well in your own culture. Amazing results.
So. I have a question. when it comes to sustainability of the concept? Because we're talking primary schools now, right? We have schools like Montessori schools, we have Dalton schools,
Yes.
and then you go to secondary school, and then you go to university, and then you have to do standardized testing, and then there's punitive accountability. Does it last? Does it endure? When you go to such a great primary school, and then you go to such a mind-numbing secondary school?
Yes, it can. And so what we've done is that we had a lot of like district superintendents say, we've got 30 Leader in Me schools and they're phenomenal. And the middle school can tell me which kids are coming from Leader in Me schools and which kids aren't. And we want it here. So we've worked with educators and we've now developed this so it goes all the way through 12th grade. It's K through 12 now.
Yeah.
And it's just starting. We're only 2 years into this, but we recognize that issue as well. And there's a solution. And guess what the solution is? It's they figure it out. We're giving them the principles and the tools in these middle schools, these high schools. They figure out how to apply these same principles. Whole child education, empowering them to own their own grades. Teachers model what they want to see in the children, which is key. All these principles are being applied now in middle and high school, and we have I don't know how many we have, several hundred now around the world. I don't know how many we have there in the Netherlands.
Secondary schools, you mean?
Secondary schools, yes.
Who apply the principles of seven?
Who apply the principles of Leader in Me.
Yeah, Leader in Me. All right.
So we feel like there's a solution there, but I think you make a really good point, though. I think there's a lot of really good solutions. Montessori is a wonderful school system.
Yeah.
It kind of hits early childhood and then dies.
Yeah, exactly. Then
the Leader in Me is the K-12 solution, and the schools that are doing it are doing some wonderful things, getting great results.
I was told by one of your employers, Marcel, that you're rolling out the secondary school program in the Netherlands after the summer break. So I'm really curious what's going to happen and what it looks like.
Let's watch it.
Yeah, let's watch it. I'm really looking forward to it. So let's go to your book. Before you wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens, there was, of course, your father's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Then someday you decided, well, let's translate this to a version which applies to teens, which inspires teens. And then you started to write. And you had your father's principles as a start. What did you do to translate those principles into a teenage version? What did you do all those mornings when you woke up at 5 and started writing for a couple of hours?
Yeah, well, I felt like I read my father's book. Growing up, he was a famous author, and people would cry on my shoulder. People I didn't know would come up to me and say, "Oh, your dad's book changed my life." And I'm thinking, he's kind of weird. But then when I finally read The 7 Habits, when I got older and finally read it, I thought, wow, he's matured so much. It was so profound. I felt like, I was a football player in America. I played for a university, and because of that, I got on a speaking circuit where every week I would speak to high school audiences. Mm-hmm. I did hundreds of them. And I kind of learned how to communicate to these kids and, got into their world again. And I wasn't, I was in my 20s, so I was pretty young too. And then I thought, these principles are so powerful. They can be applied to school and friends and dating and grades and teachers. And let's just, change the context. So that's what I did. I got this idea one day, and it just like a light bulb went off. I thought, I can do this. So what I did is I just said, okay, be proactive. Read my dad's book. I thought, okay, how does this apply to a teenager? Mm-hmm. Then I went out and I got hundreds of kids. I'd get them in focus groups. Come over to my house tonight, 20 of you, girls, boys, ages like 14 to 18. let me talk. What are your challenges? You know, what are you struggling with? Tell me about friends, and let me show you this first chapter I wrote. What do you think? Oh, that stinks. You're trying to be like, don't try to be like a teenager. Be yourself. You should, you know, and so that went on for 3 years. I did 50 focus groups. Wow. I had hundreds of kids, student readers. They would say, let me tell you my experience. Let me give you one example. So in Habit 1, we teach be proactive. Mm-hmm. You know, you can happen to life or it can happen to you. And so I went and taught a class at a high school and said, come up with you guys, you 5 are in charge of Habit 1 presentation, Habit 2. By the end of the semester, I want you to give a presentation, right? So this group caught up on Habit 1, just blew me away with all their insights and stories. And I would say, can I get permission to use that? Can you write it down here? Give me permission to use your idea. And one of them came up and said, okay, they had a Coke bottle and a bottle of water. Here's being reactive. You know, you wake up, your mom gets mad at you. You can't find your blouse. You go to school, someone says your hair is terrible. Keep shaking the bottle, right? And this is how most people are. You open the cap and it explodes. And then she had a bottle of water. You know, on the other hand, if you're proactive, you carry your own weather. These things happen to you. Shake the bottle, nothing happens. Yeah. I thought that's a brilliant metaphor. Yeah. So I put that in the book. Got permission, right? Put it in the book. That's used extensively now across the whole world. Came from a 15-year-old at Timpview High School. Wow. So that's how it came about. Is these are powerful ideas. I feel like the 7 Habits, written by my father, was a breakthrough in the social, emotional, behavioral sciences, just like there's breakthrough in other physical science areas. And it was his life's work, kind of basically figuring out these are the essentials. These 7 are essential and basic and foundational. Starts with yourself. You know, I'm not a victim. I'm responsible. Be proactive. And then begin with the end in mind. Where do you want to go? What's your blueprint for the day, for the relationship, for your business, for your life, for your marriage? And then it's put first things first, Habit 3, which is make sure the things that matter most get proper time and attention, right? So it's I'm in charge. This is where I'm going. I prioritize, control my time. That's the private victory. If I win that, I'm now ready to win victories with other people. Mm-hmm. If I lose this, I'm not ready for this yet. I got to go back to myself first. I've got a problem with my teenage daughter, my spouse, my colleague. It starts with me. I got to, you know, get my act together first, and then I can work with others. And that's called the public victory, which is think win-win. Foundation of all great relationships is mutual benefit. Habit 5, seek first to understand, then to be understood. Key communication skill, not speaking, not writing, listening. Right? 2 ears, 1 mouth. Use them accordingly. So that's it. You want to be effective with other people? Understand them first. Habit 6, synergy. Value differences. You're different than me. That's good. Not a threatening thing. Learn how to create 1 + 1 that can equal 3 or more. You know, that's compound interest because of getting together. And then habit 7, sharpen the saw, which is body, heart, mind, and spirit. 4 tires on a car. Keep them in alignment. So those are powerful principles, and I thought, let's apply to the teenage experience. Did all that work with those teenagers. Voila, that's the book.
So when you were a teenager yourself, you didn't realize the impact, or maybe you realized the impact your father was having, but you refer to an example when somebody was crying on your shoulders, and you didn't really understand why. But now looking back, of course, you know that what an amazing impact Stephen Covey has had on so many people. But does history repeat itself? I mean, when your children look at your work, how do they react?
Kind of the same way I did. I'm trying to persuade my kids to read it. And I think most of all, I didn't read my dad's book till I was out of high school.
Okay.
But he modeled it well, and my mom did too. So, for example, I'd come home from school and say something like, "Dad, I'm going to flunk algebra, and it's my teacher's fault. He stinks." And he'd take me aside and say, "Okay, if you flunk algebra, it's your fault, not your teacher's." "No way." "Yeah." And about some issues, instead of talking about him, talking behind his back and spreading rumors about him, go talk with him.
Yeah.
I'd say, "You're crazy, Dad. Where's Mom?"
Yeah.
But so he was teaching, he's teaching me don't talk behind people's backs. Yeah. Teaching me you're responsible, don't blame somebody else. He's teaching me if you have a problem with somebody, talk with them. Yeah. So he was such a, he's teaching me these principles all the time, and so I hope to teach them to my kids. I think all the time about the way I'm behaving right now. What's that saying to my children, right? It's a great quote of, teach your children wisely, and when necessary, use words.
Talking about words, I saw a video on YouTube of your father preaching for the Mormon church, and he came with a great lighthouse metaphor. How important has religion been when constructing his work and your work?
Yeah. Well, I think faith is a big part of my life, and it's been a big part of my father's life. And that said, I mean, the professional work we do, we don't mix the two. I feel, so my father, his work is all about principles. And, some people, principles are like gravity, right? Gravity is a physical law principle, but the principles he speaks about are human principles. So responsibility, vision, hard work, love, service. These are all natural laws, natural principles that work everywhere, right? And it's funny, sometimes you go to different cultures, one of my travels, and people will say, I'll be in China, and they'll say, "Oh, those 7 habits, they're just like," and they'll name some religion or philosophy. And the same thing will happen in Japan.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And Stephen always said, these aren't religious. They don't belong to any person. These are just natural laws and the way things are. And these, if you follow principles, if you follow the principle of thinking win-win, mutual benefit or responsibility or vision or abundance, you'll prosper in the end. Maybe not in the short term, but in the end you will. And so, we've always approached it that way. Faith has been a strong part of our life, but professionally we don't mix the two, and we focus on natural laws and principles.
When he was writing the book, he studied, centuries of literature on effectiveness, on successful people. And I was wondering, because I don't have insight in that process, could you refer to books or works that are really of great importance, that are the underlying part of the 7 habits? What kind of books can you refer to that are really important as theoretical base?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you kind of the history of that. So when Stephen was developing the 7 habits, he was a professor, right, for many years. And so his doctorate was on, he studied American literature, and he looked at, 200 years, and he just said he just read everything, right, of American literature in the area of success and development, right, and progress. And he said, the first 150 years, he noticed it was all about character traits, like the things I've been talking about, principles, hard work, and effort, and teamwork, and so forth. And then he noticed, he wasn't expecting this, but he noticed the last 50 years, and his dissertation was in the 70s, right? Then he noticed the last 50 years of American history, there was a significant shift from kind of character issues to quick fix, he called it. So things like how to look good, how to wear your hat the right way, how to, negotiate, tips and tricks for appearance, appearing better, and really getting your way. It wasn't founded on principles, right? It was, many times it was against natural laws and principles. It was like manipulation and technique and surface things. So that's where this all came from. And out of this, he just said, wow, there's this massive shift. We need to get back to the character ethic. In fact, that was the original title of the book, Restoring the Character Ethic. And then
Destroying the character ethic?
Restoring.
Oh, restoring. Oh, all right.
Restoring the character ethic. And then he started, identifying these habits, and then it shifted. But it was all, so his underpinnings were, a lot of just great thinkers and just looking around the world. And I'd have to go back and dig this up.
Mm-hmm.
But we have some articles on this and some of the books that really influenced Stephen, right? For example, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, the Jewish Austrian psychiatrist who was in the camps of Nazi Germany, right? And while he was there, they were performing experiments on his body. He saw his family killed, and he discovered what he called the ultimate human freedom, which is I can choose my response to whatever they do to me. That was a major influence on my father, right? He talks about that in his book. So his was really just looking at all the great wisdom literature around the world as part of this study, seeing the shift, and then seeing these common themes of look at this responsibility. Everyone's talking about a different way across the world and have been for centuries. And that is foundational to everything else, right? Is I'm not a victim. I'm an agent of change. I can choose. And that's where, he formed Habit One. So those were, I apologize, I can't give you the specific books that came out of it, other than that Frankl book, but there were at least 50 books that were very formative in my father's writing of the 7 Habits.
Talking about evidence, on your website leaderinme.org, there's an extensive body of research. Actually, I was pleasantly surprised to see that you're paying so much attention to that part of educational change, evidence-based. So could you highlight maybe 1 or 2 researches that show the effectiveness of your program?
Sure. Yes. Yeah, we feel like it's really important to have good data and to show this works. And we have now 40 independent university studies showing the efficacy of Leader in Me. So one study we did was across the state of Florida. And we looked at Leader in Me schools versus non-Leader in Me schools. We have a lot in Florida. And it was looking at peer schools as well. So you really had some good science behind it, right? And basically the researchers came back and concluded that there's significant increase in behavior improvement with Leader in Me schools versus non-Leader in Me schools. They also found significant influence in science test score improvement, statistical significant improvements. They reasoned as to why that happened, and the hypothesis is because Leader in Me teaches such good social emotional skills. There's so much communication and coordination in science classes and such that really increased the test scores. So we have that. We have a lot of great data from the state of Michigan. We have data in the state of Texas where students were, science and math scores of disadvantaged populations increased significantly. One of the things that's hard to measure that we look at as well is student self-confidence, and there's some tests that we can take. It's basically self-assessment, but they show really great increases. And you also look at teachers' assessments of student self-confidence, right? Mm-hmm. Teacher engagement, huge increases in teacher engagement. And this is one thing time and I maybe could stress is it's crazy to think you can say we're going to change the outcomes of this school by not changing yourself as a teacher administrator. And too often we think, okay, just give them this curriculum, that'll fix it. Mm-hmm. Or more money or a better smart board, you can show stuff, that'll fix it. Our learning is it's inside out, just like the 7 habits. Private victories precede public victories. Muriel said we had to change first as a staff before we could expect our students to change. Started with us. And that is the key learning of Leader Me is it starts with the teachers.
Yeah.
And if they model it well, if they learn it, if they're changing, it'll get into the kids. They'll feel it, mm-hmm. Right? Roland Barthes, he's one of the great educators. He's real popular in America. I don't know how big he is in the Netherlands. Roland Barthes, and he's written 30 books on education. Okay, here's his concluding idea from all his work. He said this, I'll paraphrase. The quality of the relationships that exist among the adults in the school has more to do with the outcomes of the kids than any other factor.
Yeah, that sums it all up.
It is.
And when you look at other literature as well, when I look at Schools That Learn from Peter Senge or Michael Fullan, Professional Capital, it all comes down to the way we interact. So I have 2 or 3 more questions, and one is, you are in the footsteps of your father, and how do you detach from that? Because you're always, I can imagine, or many times compared to your father. So what's your signature in your book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens, and the signature of your father? How do you two distinguish?
Yeah. Well, I try not to compare. Mm-hmm. My father was good and not ever saying, I want you to be like me, or I want you to do what I'm doing. I just kind of naturally went that way. No pressure from him. But I don't know. I feel like one time I said, Dad, what is leadership? And he said this profound quote. He said, leadership to me, Sean, is communicating to another person their worth and potential so clearly they see it in themselves. And I teared up when he said that, because he modeled the very thing he was saying to me. He was so good at communicating to me my worth and potential that I could see it. Even when sometimes I didn't believe in myself mm-hmm. so much or got self-doubt. He saw it, and so I feel that from him. That, you know what, you're your own person. You have immense worth and potential. Don't compare yourself to me. So I feel like what I'm good at is I think I'm better at business than he was. So I feel he got some brilliant ideas. My job is to help spread them. And business is a great model in which to do it. And in education, I feel like my signature is helping to spread the ideas he started, and also I'm more practical. He's theoretical. He gets too complicated. My mother used to go to his presentations, and afterwards everyone would compliment him, and she'd say, "That was awful, Stephen. You were so complicated. So many charts, and simplify your PowerPoint and tell stories. People like stories." He'd say, "Oh, I'm so glad that someone speaks the truth to me." Yeah. So, yeah.
My penultimate question is about, I always say, practice what you preach. And that goes for the 7 habits as well. So, for the sake of understanding the 7 habits for the people who are listening or watching or reading the article, could we go over the 7 habits and see how you apply them in your life? Because my last question is, what does your future like? And I think that when we talk about the end in mind, that answers that question as well, your future. So let's combine the 2 last questions. Practice what you preach, and what projects are you involved in? What does your future look like? So let's start with habit number 1, be proactive. What does it look like in your life right now?
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to take initiative, and again, my big focus, and this gets into habit too a lot, is begin with the end in mind. I feel a stewardship towards what I saw at A.B. Combs, what's happening there in the Netherlands with these 100 schools.
Mm-hmm.
This leader in me, I feel a stewardship to get this to as many students as we can, because I think it's life changing for them and for the administrators that teach them. So I feel a great responsibility for that. I think all the data, the leader in me is, there are lots of good things out there. I'm not saying this is the only thing, right? But I think it's a pioneering innovation that will influence lots of others, and it's so in line with all the research. If you look at John Hattie, I don't know if you've had him on your show.
Yeah, I interviewed him as well. Yes, he was the first one actually. Yeah.
Yeah, you look at his number one influence on outcomes is teacher efficacy.
Yeah.
Number two is self-reported grades, self-reported scores.
Mm-hmm.
This is exactly what Leader Me schools do. Is self-reported. And you look at all the other research, out there, Hargreaves and DC, and
mm-hmm.
I feel like these are all in alignment with what the 7 habits are doing. Right? It's just a different model.
And they're some serious scholars. I talked to them as well, so you can take them seriously, of course.
Yeah, you can. So my I'd like to take this to as many students as we can.
Yeah. So let's begin with the end in mind.
I have. Yeah.
And
in mind. So what am I doing on putting first things first?
Yeah. I mean, you have 4,000. Try
to put my family first. So life is short. I was unfortunate to have lost a daughter when she was 21 in an accident. I've just learned there's nothing more important than your family, and I know you've got 2 kids, Timon, and you can't lose that. So that's my number one priority.
How does it show?
What's that?
How does it show?
First things first. I have one-on-one dates with my kids each month. They choose. I try to do family traditions on a regular basis. I block out time in advance, so I try not to work too much. I could be gone every night. I say I don't travel more than 7 nights a month, so I can be home more. So that's how I put first things first. Think win-win. Want me to go through each of these?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Real quick? Okay, think win-win. This to me is about relationships at work. I'm part of a big company, all kinds of politics that go on. And I just know things will go well if I'm always thinking well of other people. Don't talk behind people's backs. Do everything I can to avoid that. Be loyal to the absent, right? If they're not around, be loyal to them.
Like your school teacher you were complaining about. Mm-hmm.
Like my school teacher, yeah. So I try to do that. I try to listen well, seek first to understand, habit 5.
Mm-hmm.
This one is, I watched my mom and dad. They were so good at this that it's kind of ingrained in me. I find it natural to listen to people. Synergize, habit 6. I love recruiting people on my team that are different than me. Marcel, our colleague there in Europe, he's got a much different background and life experience, and it's a joy to work with Marcel. We see the world, so differently in so many ways, and yet we have the same beliefs on some key things.
How big is your team right now, nowadays?
Yeah, it is. That is your team.
Now, I mean, how big is it?
Oh, how big? How big is the team? We have like 250 members direct, and then we've got 80 licensed partners around the world that have another several hundred employees. So yeah, that's how big we are.
All right, and the last habit, sharpen the saw. How do you do that?
Okay, I'll answer that, but then you have to tell me what you do. Okay?
I will.
Got a deal? Okay. What I do is I like routine, so I get up early, 5:55, and I exercise for a half hour. I read and plan the day and get prepared for a half hour. And so I got a full hour of me time, and I try to keep it inviolate and do it every day. And I probably do it 5 out of 7 days. Pretty good at it. It makes a big difference. It kind of grounds me, gets me ready for the day. And that's been my routine. I love doing that. Sharpens my saw. And then I've got a date night with my wife once a week.
That's good.
On Thursday nights, because Fridays and Saturdays get bombarded with kid stuff. So that's been really good for our relationship, right? So that's some of the things I do is to sharpen the saw.
Well, how do I sharpen the saw? Well, yeah, I'm a musician by trade. So I compose music. And sometimes when I want to persuade people to do an interview, like Parker J. Palmer, I said, well, if you do an interview, I compose you a song. So I wrote him a song, which is called The Courage to Teach, one of his most famous books. So he really liked it. We did the interview in the end. And now I'm trying to interview Howard Gardner, but he told me he's interviewed out. He doesn't want to do interviews anymore. So I'm composing music for all of his 8 intelligences. So I like to compose music, and I like to interview because it's all my free time. And I think as an educator, you can choose, and it's one of your father's principles as well. You can complain about education because there's so many wrongs in education, but yet on the other hand, there's so many opportunities. We are talking right now, and that's an amazing opportunity, and that's because I wrote you a letter, right? And you said, yes, let's do it. I mean, everything is possible, and life can be such an amazing adventure and surprise. So, and of course, family. So that's sharpens the soul.
Yeah, that's good. That's great. I think you've got something pretty special going in your life.
Yeah, so I'd like to end by saying what I like about you most is the fact that even though you have told these stories for so many times, when you tell your story, it's authentic. And I can see, even you've told the story a gazillion times, you still enjoy it. You really live that moment. And when you talk about the school leader that's fixing the school, when you talk about your father, it's authentic. And that's what I like, because I've talked to people who do this automatically and they don't live the story anymore. It's just a trick. But what I saw in our talk was not a trick. It was really authentic, and I really appreciate it a lot. So thanks.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that, and I feel it. I'm passionate about what we're doing, and trying to make a difference best I can. So just like you are.
So next time when you're in Holland, let me know, and we'll shake hands.
I'd love to meet you face to face. I look forward to it. And you wrote, so you got to write me a song, dude.
I will write you a song.
A song called "Leader in Me" or something about leadership in kids.
Let's do that. That's a nice challenge. But give me a hint. What kind of music do you like? What do you listen to?
I love. I'm kind of a eclectic mix. I grew up loving hard rock. My friends were all in bands. I love Broadway music, soundtracks to movies.
Fred Astaire and stuff like that.
My teenage son loves rap music, and he's got me into Macklemore, and I like that too. So I'm a little bit of everything.
All right. Well, let me surprise you.
Anywhere.
I will surprise you. So we'll see. I'll record the song and I'll send it to you.
I'd be absolutely honored and thrilled.
The Leader in Me. We've just established the title. Well, Sean, thanks a lot for your time. I'm absolutely convinced that we're going to see each other in the future, and we're going to shake hands and enjoy the rest of the day.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
See
Bye.
Okay.